This is Mark Livesey, and you're listening to The Gritty Bowmen.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Someone tell me where the Humane Society of the United States has ever bought 1 acre of habitat, where they have ever funded one project that got rid of invasive weed species, where they've ever funded one project that got rid of the Asian carp in the Illinois River. I mean,
none of it.
Pick whatever it is. They've got net assets in the hundreds of millions, and they've never done anything.
I did this whole series of posts of the hierarchy of dead animals on Instagram, on social media. So I had like a picture of chicken. No one cares. Like dead, like chicken meat. Yeah. A picture of chicken. A picture of fish, like cut up fish. No one cares.
Yeah.
A picture of an actual fish. Still, no one seems to give a picture of a dead turkey. No one seemed to care. It seemed like But then I showed bear meat. And I showed some bear meat that was just in a bag. What about that? And I'm like, now we're getting weird, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's just meat, but it says bear on it. This is bear meat.
Yeah.
We care about wildlife. We care about landscapes. We care about all the things that are necessary for conservation. We'll tax ourselves 11%.
But if I showed an actual bear, like we posted some pictures of he's taking me bear hunting, actual bears that I've killed. Gee, I've never had anything in my life where people get mad at me more.
On this episode of Gritty Bowmen, I get to hang out with the one and only Randy Newberg. Randy Newberg identifies himself as a hunter. Growing up in a small town in the Midwest, Randy spent a lot of time running around on public land, hunting and trapping small game. I would argue that Randy is the quintessential public land hunter, and he uses his platforms to advocate for hunters and public access. In addition to representing hunters in Congress and state legislatures, he serves as a volunteer and board member for many hunting and conservation groups. I can honestly say that Randy Newberg is one of my favorite people on the planet. He says what he means, and he means what he says. And if you don't like what he has to say, well, then you've mistaken him for someone who gives a damn. Follow Randy on Instagram and Facebook, and check out his YouTube channel for some good public land hunting films, and check out his podcast, Hunt Talk Radio.
Hey, folks, this is Randy Newberg, and you are listening to The Gritty Bowmen.
So for those of you listening, in case you haven't figured it out, we're on the Gritty Bowmen podcast with Randy Newberg from Hunt Talk Radio and from like Fresh Tracks back in the day.
Yep. Hey, I'm trying to think of what the next platform will be. Someday I want to be like Brian.
You've been around a while.
In our camp, we look at each other and we say, "What would Brian call?"
Yeah.
Man, we aren't seeing anything this week. What would Brian do?
Yeah. That's very, very. That's just tune into the Gritty Bowmen podcast. You'll figure it out.
We do. My camera guys, because I'm so busy a lot of times I don't get to catch them all.
Yeah.
But Marcus and Michael, they listen to you, to Meat Eater, to Wired to Hunt, and a few others. And they'll be like, yeah, I was listening to Brian and Schneider on Gritty the other day. And I'm like, really? What'd they have to say? And they'll tell me, I'm like, oh, they're full of, you know what? You can't believe a word they say. This is all comedy relief. It's all scripted. It's like grumpy old men, Putz and Gustafson or whatever. Whoever.
There definitely is a dynamic there. I found that, what podcasts that are your most like downloaded? Like what topics? Or
for whatever reason, elk. We can just sit and do a Q&A thing on elk because we have that Hunt Talk forum and we get tons and tons of questions there. And don't ask me why, because I am so much of a below average elk hunter.
Yeah.
Why people want to know what I have to say about elk hunting is still a mystery. But it seems like if I talk about elk or if I talk about politics, and I think the reason for that is it's hard for them to get a dose of politics without a heavy R or D slant somewhere else. Whereas me, you just get it with both barrels.
Right.
And
you're
the
the party of public lands and hunting and
so
it's not about Democrat or Republican or anything like that. It's interesting. You for me, I would say elk.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I've noticed this trend. Anytime we talk about elk or elk hunting, it is definitely a solid episode. People seem to not be able to get enough of that information. And then any videos that we do around elk hunting,
Right.
they do very well also.
Even on TV, our worst, what I view as our weakest story that's an elk hunt will get more viewership than what I think is our strongest mule deer story. And just
I don't. Yeah, I mean, I think
mule deer need to learn how to bugle.
Dude, I love elk hunting. I mean, I love it. I mean, it's a passion, and maybe it's because I grew up with it that I take it for granted, like we always do.
Right.
But I don't. I mean, I'm just as excited over, an Alaskan bear hunt or a, a mule deer hunt or whitetail. I mean, I don't know. I find elk hunting awesome, but I don't understand. I don't quite grasp the huge drive in the show. But the other one we get is we get a lot whenever we share our personal opinion on a subject.
Oh yeah.
Like it doesn't matter what it is. If we really get down and dirty and we are truly honest with our opinion, that whether it's divisive or, I mean, we get people listen to it because they completely disagree with us and they want to rant, or we get people that listen to it and they're like, yes, we could totally agree. I don't really do a podcast for controversial reasons or to get attention.
Right. Not clickbait.
Yeah, no, but I feel like my opinion, Aaron, we both have strong opinions on subjects around the hunting world, and when we get into that space, I just don't want to sugarcoat it, you know, and I want to be as forthright as I can, as well as trying to be. I mean, I'd be lying if I wasn't trying to be persuasive. Yeah. Like there's a certain ideal I have in my mind, and I want other people to kind of look at it from that angle. I'm open to another angle as well, but I really do want to. I had this conversation with Shane Mahoney day before yesterday where we talked about the perception of hunting in your role as a hunter and how you present hunting. Yeah. And that's divisive in the hunting world.
It is. The person who says, well, it's my right, I can do whatever I damn well please. Well, you're going to be doing whatever you damn well please for a short period of time. Mm-hmm. Is the reality of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the idea that we can just hide behind the fact that something's legal is ludicrous to me. It's the whole world is based on, especially in the United States, it's based on the consensus of the people. Right. That's what it is. It is. At the end of the day, democracy. Yeah. The majority rules. Mm-hmm. When the majority says, I don't like what you do anymore, it doesn't matter if it's legal, because then they'll just make it illegal. Right. And now it's never been a good argument when a guy says, well, I shot that thing in the butt and then I shot it in the neck, and it was a long shot, but you know what? It's legal. Yeah. I got my meat. It's like, maybe it's legal, but it's not right. Yeah. And people feel that, they know it, and that legal argument isn't an argument at all. No. It's a house of cards.
And even if it's legal, it's still not something you got to tell the whole world about. Mm-hmm. It's, it just, when you are 5% of the population, how do you lead a message when you are only 5%? You have to be compelling, you have to be honest, you have to be transparent, and you have to be, to some degree, aware of the total context of who is viewing that message and from what lens or through what lens they view it. And just later today, I'm going up to Helena, and I'm giving the keynote address for the Montana Hunter Ed Association. Yep. And I have rewritten this piece. It's 20 minutes. I have rewritten it a dozen times because of the point you mentioned, how controversial within our world some of these topics are. And these Hunter Ed volunteers, they're pretty dialed in. So I'm wondering, how are they going to take it when a TV guy gets up there and starts talking about what message is harmful and which message is helpful to the bigger picture of hunting.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to give them my thoughts and my opinion, and I guess we'll see where the chips fall. But I do worry, and I used to worry about it a lot. Kind of like the other day, we're talking about haters, and I used to worry about people hating on me. I don't anymore. I still haven't got over that hump of worrying about, am I being too judgmental about the behavior or the motive of someone else?
Right.
And it's not a judgment of their motive or their behavior as it is a judgment of, here is how other people see this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for some old washed up guitar player to jump in a helicopter and shoot pigs in the ass and put it on national TV with that pig running with an arrow in its ass.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say, guess what? Go back to playing bad music.
Right.
We don't need that as our image. And then when he gets up on the stage at a national event and calls all of us who are worried about this message, tells us that we're a bunch of candy asses, that we're rolling over on our First Amendment right, and blah, 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 and every other word's the F word. I speak out against others in the hunting community who want to drag us down that path. Mm-hmm. I think, you know what? I've got platforms. I have a vision of where I think hunting needs to go, and if I think hunting is getting drawn into some place at a point of no return, I'm going to stand up and say something about it. I don't care if it hurts that person's feeling. And it's not a judgment that he's doing, something that's illegal or immoral. It's just, think about how the rest of the world sees this. Mm-hmm. They don't see it as funny at all.
Yeah.
They don't. So it becomes this almost hypocritical thing where we say, we love animals, we conserve habitat for them, we treat them respectfully, we do this, we do that. And then what is the message people see if they turn on the TV? They see messaging that is completely contradictory to what we say our motives are.
Right. Absolutely. We all that says is these are great moving targets.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that that's a critter that, that you have any kind of respect for.
Right.
And it's funny, there's the animal comment like, pigs have no souls, so people are like, shoot them with machine guns from helicopters or whatever, or, a whitetail, it's like there's certain critters where people definitely are much more tolerant of them dying and how they die.
Right.
You take that same experience and you go and you shoot a wolf or a bear and it's going to go all over, social media, but you shoot pigs like that, people seem to be more tolerant of it.
We in the hunting world are more tolerant of it, and
I think those who live in communities where pigs are destroying the habitat, those people are fairly tolerant of it as well.
Right.
But you take someone in LA or New York who has no idea about that stuff, and then they see this happening on TV, and it makes no sense.
Right. And I'm not saying those people are anti-hunters. They're just, they don't know. They maybe they don't have an opinion about hunting. Or very often, I run into a lot of people who don't hunt, but are interested in hunting. About these people are really serious about this. They donate all this time, all this money. They take care of it. They eat it. They to a lot of people who don't come from a hunting background, hunting is an intriguing activity.
Yeah.
And they're honestly looking for more information. And then they stumble across some dude doing something that's like, oh no.
Here's the thing, like when you say something like when you're repeating the comment and it's, hey, you're just giving up this First Amendment right, or you're a candy ass because you have this soft spot for animals. That sort of crap pisses me off because I don't look at caring about animals or wanting to take an ethical shot or being careful in how I hunt as a weakness.
No.
I don't see it as macho to just be like, I winged it. It rolled, it got back up, and I did it again. And for me, I just am from a position, I find it disturbing and offensive and sad, right? So I think there are a lot of people, though, a lot of men in the world that if they acknowledge that or say that, then they feel like they're being weak. Yeah. And I don't associate the two. I don't see it as weakness. In fact, I see it as strength, because to me, to really to be concerned about an animal, how it's killed, and to care about life is really the difference between you, human being, sentient, being able to have a conscious thought, having a conscience, is the difference between you and a bear.
Right.
When a bear goes up and snatches a baby fawn, it doesn't feel anything about that. It's not about is it right or wrong, or there's no debate in their mind.
Right.
Whereas humanity is like, we have that ability to think on that next plane where you're like, was my action appropriate or inappropriate? And I think with that comes stewardship and responsibility. And it bothers me to sit there and see somebody that goes out and kills without compassion.
Yeah. And it's easy for all of us to have our own ideas and opinions on it.
Well, Shane talked about it, and he's like, I don't expect every hunter to feel the same way.
Right.
Like,
and I don't.
Yeah, he's like, they're just like people are different here, and he gave a great example. There's going to be individuals who have a different connection about it. And like, to your point, he's just saying, be conscious of, the other guy's walking his shoes a little bit. If he's not familiar with it, are you going to assault his senses with blood and gore that he's not used to? Or, he doesn't expect you to really feel the same way, but take the responsibility to share it the same way. Like Joe Rogan has mentioned, the single mother in LA that has like 3 kids that's never been in the wild and never seen an animal killed. Mm-hmm. And you're going to throw on your TV in her living room as she's flipping through channels, shooting a pig in the ass as it's running through a field, and then you jump out and stab it with a knife. Okay, she's just going to not be ready for that.
That's exactly it. And nothing you can do after that point of trying to describe your motives, why you hunt, whether it's food, culture, conservation, all the reasons why we hunt. You will never convince that person that those motives are true. It will always be hypocritical because the behavior they saw did not match the stated motive. But
I also look at it today, and this is my opinion again. If you take a production that someone made where there's just this all about the human, the person, hard music, going out in the wild, killing an animal, blood everywhere, blood on their body and hands, and it's like gore, and I killed it and I conquered it. And you contrast that with, let's take a production like Beyond the Roar, my friend Aaron Hitchens at Rock House Motion, or maybe one of Donnie's films like Who We Are, which is basically a case for hunting in today's modern world. And you stick those two things and you compare that cinematic and beautiful scenery, respect for the animal kind of production to the blood and gore film, which, I mean, it doesn't take any kind of intelligence to realize that one is speaking about the beauty, the spirituality of being in the outdoors, the connection to the world that we live in, a respect for life, and the other one is all about vain attention, conquering, overcoming, and destroying life. And it's like, you don't even have to like hear anything from the message. Like, you just need to watch the two and feel the music, and you can feel the difference. Yeah. I mean, and to me, when someone's out there making a film, and we talk about this often because I think it's incredible that we have social media today and all the ability to, almost anybody can pick up a phone. I recorded my Alberta mule deer hunt. 50% of it's this phone right here in my hand that filmed it. And it's a good little flick, and people liked it. And So anybody can sit there, film some stuff with equipment today, and share a story. And I think right now, if they're sharing the right story that presents that the things that we truly value, and not getting caught up in other motives like personal gain or attention or short-term goal, I think that's where we have a chance to really change the perception of hunting across the world. But it takes an army of hunters that are doing it the right way to do that.
Yeah. Because people will be attracted or will use the example of the one. Even if you have the whole army, they're going to seek out the one that's distasteful. And I'm always aware that I'm a little bit different duck in that this isn't what pays my bills.
Yeah.
If I continue to lose money at TV like I have for 10 years, I'm still not going to be out in the street. I might not see my 30th wedding anniversary.
Right.
So because of that, I'm allowed to make some decisions that are just, you know what, this is what I want to do. I don't care.
Yeah.
This isn't paying my mortgage. So if this is the story I see and the story I want to throw out there to kind of roll the curtains back, because when you do this, whether it's on YouTube or on TV or even in a podcast, you're somewhat letting the world look at you behind your curtain.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so for me, hunting is such a powerful activity that I try to tell the story of what happened here. And I'll let the chips fall where they may. And
like, you're not motivated by trying to get a bigger contract for Hunt Talk Radio.
No.
You already have a good income somewhere else, and you're not going to allow the motive to grow Randy Newberg. You're not going to let that motive get in the way of what really matters.
Right. If I go back to the why when we built the business plan for what used to be On Your Own Adventures, that was built in 2008. And never let an accountant build a business plan. You will kill 4 trees to print all the paper when an accountant builds a business plan. But so many things have changed in that business plan. It started out as a TV model to, then, oh, wow, all of a sudden along comes a podcast. Then it comes a YouTube channel. Then comes all this other stuff. The one thing in that business plan that still today is the same is what the why was. And I think if I ever had to change the why I do this, it wouldn't be fun. And I'd just fold up my shop and say, you know what? Time to take my wife fishing. I've lost my passion for it, and I've probably lost any value. Assuming there is any value to what we do. So I'm thankful for that I am in that situation, and I'm never going to be very rich, but if anyone, my grandma always said the number of people who come to your funeral depends on the weather that day. And if the weather is such that some people come to my funeral, I hope that they say, you know what? That Newberg, that guy, he hunted more than anybody I know. That will be an accomplishment. If I die at the CPA firm, my life's a failure. I've told my wife, somehow, if I'm dying in that CPA firm, you're going to see me with the last energy in my body. I'm crawling out to the field out behind the office building, and I'll die there. Yeah. I am not dying in the office. That's like failure.
Yes.
So I don't know. It just kind of how I look at it and what drives me. And I end up surround now as I'm getting older and older. I just surround myself with people who kind of think about it the same way.
Yeah.
We all go through that process where, we hunted with this person and it wasn't that much fun. We were hunting. I think we all get attracted to a certain kind of...
I say this all the time, like Gritty Bowmen, by the virtue of the content I produce, attracts a certain type of individual.
Right.
And the type of individual, and if I change the content, it'll attract some other type of individual. So I start changing the message, it can attract a different type of individual. But then with that, the individuals that come because they're drawn to whatever it is I produce and whatever message I share, those people can also grow when I grow or change when I change, right? Mm-hmm. And I can change because of something that they share with me, and we kind of go together. But the underlying theme is that you bring people to you by the type of stuff you produce. Mm-hmm. And those, and you absolutely, you grow it that way. So if, I look at me, I produce a lot of audio.
Yeah, you do. What, 4 episodes a week?
3, sometimes. It's been 3 lately, 2 or 3. It's dropped, but there was a time where I did 6 a week for like 5 months. So
holy cow, you must be rolling in the money. You're just losing money on each episode, but you're making just it up work. On volume, right?
But I think that when you go out and you produce something that you're passionate about and that you really care about or that you think is important, and I think that there's a group of people out there who are going to resonate with that and support what you're doing, and it motivates you to do more.
Yeah.
To keep doing it. Because for me, I did not have, I have said this before, I hunted all the time. Every season I'd get out. We shot our bows most of the year, and we spent a lot of our year talking about and planning some 2-week or 10-day trip into the Eagle Caps, or we hoping to draw tags. We're all just doing this tag strategy, and then we were trying to see who draws a tag, and then we start planning our hunt. And I mean, that's kind of how we were, which I think a lot of guys are. But the conservation piece, I thought, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, I should be involved in that. Mule Deer Foundation, I should support these organizations. And so, you have a membership and stuff, and that's about as far as it goes. And I read a few things, but I was not really actively involved in conservation. I would say I was indirectly involved by virtue of being a hunter,
right?
But I wasn't proactively engaged or aware of most of our conservation history.
Yeah.
Our conservation history, I just did not know about it. It wasn't taught in elementary school. It wasn't taught in high school. It wasn't taught in college. It wasn't brought up in the hunting community I was a part of. Mm-hmm. My dad never talked about it, and his dad never talked about it. It's like there's somewhere along the lines, I think, some point, our grandfathers, great grandfathers took it for granted, right, or just assumed everybody knew or whatnot. But it wasn't until I started consuming your content and following a lot of the messaging that you were sharing that I started to learn about conservation, and about public lands.
Yeah. Well,
and so
that's nice to know.
Oh, it's been a pivotal change. And from there I was able to go and learn more things and meet new people and become far more engaged and share a message around conservation that I think a lot of my audience didn't know either.
Yeah. So I'd be interested in your opinion on this, Brian. And so much of this ages how long you've been at this game, and I'm thankful to have been in it for as long as I have, as far as the conservation side. I'm myself and my 2 production guys, we're putting together a series of YouTube videos we want to go and shoot called The Untold Stories of Conservation, or something that people really don't know about. So yesterday at this Sitka Converge event, did you go out to the range?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that valley, the Paradise Valley, is one of the most beautiful places you'll ever see.
Yep.
So when you left Livingston and headed south, there was kind of a tighter spot in the canyon, and then once you got through there, it opened up. Mm-hmm. There's a guy who he worked for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. They were going to make that into a reservoir where you guys, in the late 60s,
just fill it with water.
70s, that was going to be a reservoir. Disrupt migration patterns for all kinds of wildlife, mess up the wonderful fishery that is the upper Yellowstone River. I mean, it was going to be a disaster, but it was considered at the time progress. So this person, he's been on my podcast before, Jim Posowitz, worked for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. He is the guy in charge of doing the kind of wildlife assessments of these energy projects.
Mm-hmm.
He is getting steamrolled by the political powers. He goes, so he kind of clocks out at 5 o'clock, and he spends 2 years engaging the citizens in the area, just doing everything he can, trying to point out, look, everybody's overlooking this. This is going to be a train wreck, blah, blah, blah. And all the elected political leaders are like, oh, no, there will be 4 jobs and, cheap electricity or whatever the pitch was. Well, Jim pretty much paid the price in the form of his career for doing that. But I wonder how many people, they say Yellowstone gets 6 million visitors a year. They come from the west entrance, south entrance, east. Wonder those who come from the north entrance, from Livingston to Gardner. And they go through that little narrow pinch in the canyon, and they look at this 40-mile long, 10-mile wide valley that looks like the Garden of Eden right now. Mm-hmm. Big snow-capped peaks, home of grizzly bears and elk and bighorn sheep and mountain goat and pronghorn and whitetail and mule deer. I wonder how many people know that if it was not for Jim Bozowitz, that would be a reservoir. So it's these little conservation stories that are in everybody's backyard that I'm trying to uncover. Mm-hmm. Because they get to that point you made of how I think we've all, I don't want to say taken for granted. It's just that we've not told some of these. We love to tell the story of our hunt.
Yes.
But there's some other really compelling and important stories to hunting, of how hunters made a huge difference on the landscape.
Right.
For everybody, that are stories that need to be told. So we've got a bunch of these on the list. And I'm just curious if people would be interested in hearing them or seeing them on our YouTube channel, or if it's just, you're not hunting. I don't want to know about it.
It's a good question because, I've talked to Casey and Jordan at Mountain Ops. I was in a meeting with them and in a meeting with Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Mm-hmm. A group of us were just kind of hanging out together and talking. And the subject was, how do you make conservation cool?
Yeah.
How do you make it sexy, appealing? Like, yeah, conservation. Mm-hmm. And that's been a challenge, to be honest, right? If you took Hunt Talk and you spent 90% of your time talking about how to kill an elk and the next hunt, you'd probably have way more downloads. And that's just a fact.
It is.
Because I look at my stats and I do a show on conservation or around public lands.
Right.
And I get like a third of the downloads that I get when I have somebody on and we talk about something sexier and more exciting.
Yeah.
So without a doubt, it affects, unfortunately, I feel like a lot of other people in the industry, and I think the tide is changing, but they realized that it didn't sell, so they didn't produce it.
Right. And that's kind of the question I'm getting to of, do you think it's worthwhile? Because as I said earlier, whether I get half the downloads or double the number of downloads, I'm going to tell things that I think are important to the hunters whose opinions I respect and appreciate.
Here's what I think, and I've done this from the start with Gritty Bowmen, and I don't want to do the same thing forever. As long as people still like it and appreciate and value what we do, I want to keep doing it. I love it, right? I do a podcast, let's say, about ladies hunting camp with Randy and Candy Yao, and it's a small camp. I think they cap it at 50 women that come. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of a niche thing. They do one in Portland. They have one in the Oregon area. And now they're doing one like in a few weeks down there in Utah. Mm-hmm. How many downloads do I get when I do a show like that? Not very many.
Yeah.
Just a few, because it's a niche subject for a niche group of people. But I get emails from women who went to that camp, and it was an absolutely pivotal, life-changing moment for, like, let's say 10 of them, 5 of them.
Yeah.
Absolutely, from that day forward, they're a different human being, and it changed the course of history for them and where they'll be 20 years from now and what contributions they'll make to this industry. But I only had 10,000 people download that episode.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, so I look at it in terms of, does it make a difference?
That's the criteria I try to focus on more.
And not, does it appeal to the masses?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I think in the hunting world, because we're a pretty homogenous community, as far as just demographically. A lot of my work in politics and public lands and going to DC and lighting up a few politicians here and there along the way allows me to get invited to step outside the normal hunting sphere that's the public land hunter to other public land users, which some of those groups are seeking me out because when they listen to the hunter story about public lands, those who honestly listen to it are like, wow, you guys have been doing this for 130 years.
I know.
How did you guys pull that off?
And not only that, how come our own community doesn't have a clue about it?
I know.
You know, and then of course, if we don't know about it, how does the greater community know about it?
Yeah. And so I've been approached by quite a few of these groups of, they want to hear the hunter's story about public lands.
But I think that's because, one of the reasons for that is because it's becoming ever increasingly more like popular, in vogue, like progressive, to get your own meat from the wild.
Oh yeah,
it
surely is.
You have like a show like Meat Eater, and he goes on to something like the Joe Rogan podcast, and Joe goes and hunts with him. Tim Ferriss goes and hunts with Ranella, and Tim talks about getting a bow or rifle and hunting, and all of a sudden you have someone who's like a Silicon Valley, whiz kid who is like, this makes so much sense, and it's so appropriate to go out and kill something and bring it home, and it's actually a very healthy and sustainable activity in today's day and age. You have someone like that giving that message to a wider community that doesn't understand it or looks at it as Shane would say, as an anachronism, some kind of strange activity from the past that has no more valid merit in today's world. And he brings it forward and says, no, it's a viable, modern day, sustainable, viable activity for today's world.
Yeah.
I think when you have an army of people growing that are in the modern world and reaching back to do the same activity that we're doing, but their motives are, around food and healthy, sustainable food and where it comes from, and you have all that, you have a huge population of people that care deeply about that. I think that it's no longer scary for them to raise their hand and say, yep, I shot a deer last year and filled my freezer with it. Before, it was like there was a negative stigma attached to the fact that if someone from my office in Portland, where I did accounting and information, I did IT governance compliance work, if that person 15 years ago had gone out and shot a deer and came back, no one would be like, that was cool. They'd be like, why do you want to be a redneck?
Yeah.
Well, why would you do that? I don't get it. Did your grandpa do it? Like, right? Now it's like, oh, that's awesome, dude. Where'd you get your gun at?
Yeah.
Where did you go? And how does the meat taste? And that's a great way to be environmentally friendly and, all of that. I couldn't kill one, but I would love to have some of the meat. I can't imagine me pulling the trigger. You have these kind of conversations that are going on. It's a completely different space. So I don't think there's as much. When someone comes forward and says, I hunt now, someone like Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook.
Right.
It's not as negative anymore. It's actually looked on very positively. That is a feather in the hat for hunting. That's like this huge excitement for me, because now we're being looked at as something progressive and modern, and also viable and important. But every time someone goes out there and does something distasteful or negative or crudely or rudely around hunting, it sort of takes us back a step every time. And it's not, I don't feel like we're conforming to some new world order.
Yeah.
What we're doing is just respecting wildlife. That's all it is.
Right. Well, I view that food thing you're talking about as a huge opportunity for us to lead and teach what we've kept within our community for a century, and kind of circled the wagons and, oh, don't trust that person, don't trust this person.
Yeah.
And where most of my criticisms come now from people is, I cannot believe that you went to a seminar and presented something at XYZ group. Do you know who so-and-so supports them?
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
They're a green decoy.
Yeah. If you think I give a flying fart, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Because if you look at any historical, whatever activity it is, whatever group, whatever community it is, the more they close in, the shorter their lifespan. And I don't
you were telling me about this earlier.
Yeah. And so I'm saying this is the time for us to not circle the wagons. And for those of you who want to criticize, oh, did you know that person got funded by this group? You know, I don't care. But like Shane Mahoney often says, all I care about are other people wanting to care about wildlife and landscapes as much as I do.
Yep.
And we'll sort out the rest of it afterwards. And one of the dangers I see in the hunting world are these nitpicking critics who want to criticize anyone who steps out of our circled wagons.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? If you want to stay in that circle of wagons, you're going to run out of food and water. For using the Oregon Trail example.
Right.
You're probably going to die of dysentery.
Right.
And I don't want that to happen to hunting and to this culture of being attached to landscapes and caring for those landscapes, because that's where your food comes from. That's really what we do. That's where hunting story came from.
Oh, well, and honestly, let's try to picture 20 years from now.
Yeah.
You tell me 20 years from now, 25 years from now, the person who tries to keep the modern, the new hunters out of our community.
Right.
The individual who is like, hey, it's legal, so just deal with it. Mm-hmm. Where are they going to be in 20 years?
Yeah, they're going to be even a smaller minority.
They will be.
Yeah, and these people who wanted to understand us better will have given up on us. Like, oh, if you guys want to be this little cliquish club, knock yourself out.
With the food movement, and I'm deep in it, I've read all these books on diet and health and with the food, and then you add to that fitness and exercise and all of that. People care about where their food's coming from.
Oh, they seriously care about where it comes from, the quality of it, what impact it has on the landscape. It's just a reality that people can stay attached to, or maybe not attached to, but people can make all of those things a priority in their life. And in today's world of information and sharing, they can go and find more about it. So when they are out looking to find out more about it, what's going to be our message? Is the message going to be, hey, we don't like you because you drive a whatever and you live in wherever and you might have voted for so-and-so.
Yeah.
You went to this, high school or this college and, oh, you do this part-time as your other interest?
You have purple hair, you have an earring, and you drive a Prius, and you work down at the mall.
The food co-op.
Yeah. And you just killed a big bull elk.
Yeah.
You can't be with us.
Right.
It's like that's that is a very closed-minded and myopic viewpoint, which I think definitely. I'm not so. I mean, I love people of all types. I really do, and I think they all. You don't have to feel threatened because someone's different than you and has a different idea. We can agree to disagree, which I do a lot of. Growing up and spending so much time in Portland, Oregon, working there in a professional field in downtown Portland for years, and some of my closest friends, some people who make me laugh so hard and are just some of the most creative people. We are not politically aligned.
Yeah.
We are not morally or religiously aligned.
Yeah. And
yet I have tremendous respect for them and who they are and how they try to comport themselves and the life they live, even though it's very different from my own. And in return, they've respected me and my decisions and how I live. And when they think of a hunter, I guarantee you they think of me.
Right.
And they think not all hunters are, boom, how I stereotype them.
Right.
And as each of us are, I think, more open, like you're describing, and more, willing to respect others and their differences, while you can still hold to your own beliefs and your own guns, but still respecting others. It's not like they're mutually exclusive.
Yeah. There is you probably won't see it in Bozeman, and I don't know where the person got the bumper sticker, but I'm going to kind of paraphrase here. But as you were saying that, it made me think of this. I saw this old rusted out Toyota 4Runner parked at a trailhead I was on one time, and he had a bumper sticker that said, "Gay hippie loggers for Jesus." And I thought, you know what? That's my style right there. Right. I don't care about any of this. I want to just, if you're at the trailhead hunting today, and you're buying ammo that helps contribute to conservation, or you're volunteering to clean up the roadway, I don't care if you are a gay hippie logger who's tied to Jesus. It doesn't matter to me. And so I almost want to get that bumper sticker remade and sell them out on my Hunt Talk website.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, it certainly makes a statement. The other thing, too, is let's say you do have deeply held beliefs in one way or another. You're not gonna influence someone by shutting them out and belittling them or by disrespecting them.
Yeah.
If you're gonna change minds and inspire people or influence people in a positive way, you've got to be open. Yeah. You've got to be welcoming. Mm-hmm. You're never going to do it by confrontation. No, people just dig in deeper.
No, it's that at that point it kind of becomes.
It's persuasion, love unfeigned. It's that's what it takes. And I think too many people, again, I think it's fear and ego are often tied to both to that action. Can't let that gay hippie logger in because he might make my kid gay, and then all of a sudden it goes down this road of where you have some ideas that conflict with others, when actually being very open and welcoming and basically aligning and complementing each other on the areas where you do agree, and agreeing to disagree in areas you don't, but still respecting each other. It's not that hard.
No, and another opportunity in addition to the food side of it is, as public lands are being, if you want to say, under assault or being compromised or whatever might be the term you'd want to put to it, the larger community of public land users are not hunters. But they are looking for guidance, leadership, understanding of, how did you hunters do this? How did you guys pull this off, being such a small minority of the total U.S. population? Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying we're the only ones who did the work on public lands, but we have done the majority of it. Going back, if you start going back to when it started in the late 1800s with Pinchot and Roosevelt and all those people who kind of took some serious hits for the sake of public lands. Well, now these other groups are coming to us and saying, who among your voices, who among your messengers in the hunting world is willing to come and tell that story to us? Because we are public land users who we just came to it 10 years ago or 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You guys have been doing this since Moby Dick was a minnow, man. How do we get some of your sauce on our burger, for lack of a better way to put it? So I'm stepping outside those bounds, and I'm working with every one of those groups, and it's interesting to read some of the comments of Newberg, I think you're going to blah,
sell
blah,
out.
Blah, or, there was an interview that someone did, and it had to do with the NRA, something or other. And I gave them some answers and said, it doesn't, whatever all this static is on the side of aligning and trying to split and conquer, whatever. To me, none of this changes my mind that I'm about clean air, clean water, productive landscapes, wildlife, and public lands.
Yep.
I'm not affected by any of this. And it struck a lot of people weird that I would speak to a reporter from a supposed far left magazine. I interact with so many media people on the left, probably more than I do on the right, because I want them to hear our story.
Right.
I don't want them to get their story from... as you were saying, someone judges the stereotype of, you're just another redneck. Nothing. I mean, I grew up as redneck as it gets. Right. And I'm going back to redneck it next week.
That's your people.
It's where I am. But I would rather these people who are writing and blogging about it have the perspective that I want to see or want society to see about our community. And if that comes with some pot shots and people trying to tag me as whatever, you know what? Stand in line and take a number. I got people supposedly coming to my house to whoop my ass. I got people, going to kill my dogs. I got whatever. It's as you've heard me say before, you've mistaken me for someone who cares about your opinion on this topic. So there
was a podcast that Shane
Brian's
did.
Got his phone out. This is never good.
Yep, I got the phone out here.
Google is your friend, right?
I'm anxious to listen to this one. I haven't heard it. Hunters and Poachers Are Not Brothers by Shane Mahoney.
Ooh,
I got to listen to that one. Yeah. That's on his podcast. But there's one where he talks about, it's a great title as well. I'm almost there.
He's scrolling.
And he says, Secrets of Leadership. It's the title. And he talks about early conservation pioneers succeeded because they understood how to convey the importance of their ideals to the public. Right. However, the conservation movement has, to a large extent, moved away from an agenda of trying to convince society of its social, cultural, and economic value. We no longer strive for the hearts of our nation's publics. The conservation community has replaced this with an emphasis on membership rosters and obtaining political influence, both often emphasizing specific issues that can hardly be viewed as being of the greatest public value or concern. So I look at like that HR 2221 and Jason Chaffetz and what he was proposing and where they were pushing it. And you look at how the hearts and minds of the people, when they heard about that, the steps that they took, because the hearts and minds of the people were aligned in this way against what he was saying. You weren't talking to some lobbyist or other politician to persuade Jason to change. It was the voice of the people with power and vehemency saying, change it and change it now. Yeah. We do not agree with this. That rolled the tide. And I think about what Shane says in this, and it's a podcast, it's a great one, where he talks about how Theodore Roosevelt appealed to the hearts and minds of the people. Right. He didn't go and work behind, he did this as well, right? He did go and work behind closed doors and politically maneuver and all of that. But at the same time, and probably the most important aspect of what he did was actually influence the people.
Right. For sure. He built the conservation ethic that no amount of science or financial data or whatever
or political maneuvering
was going to overcome the hearts and minds.
And that's where I think that's a great, it's an incredible message, because Shane's like, look, where does that fall then? how do hunters, are we too often focused on getting the right attorney and fighting the right battle in the right courtroom, when often if we change the hearts and minds of 80% of the population, that battle's won already before it goes to the courtroom.
Yep.
But that requires the hearts and minds to change like that. That requires hunters to tell the story in the right way to the right people to change their hearts and minds. So, Randy, my question to you is, how do you do things to change the hearts and minds of the people?
Yeah, I can't say I'm very good at it. For me, it's trying to be as authentic as possible. It's about, you know what? Here's some guy who grew up on the wrong side of the tracks in Big Falls, Minnesota. And if you ever go there, you'll realize the whole town is pretty much on the wrong side of the track. But the authenticity of that is, I came from a place where the connection to the land was such that we lived in such a small world, both because of the time, you didn't have, you had a party line, a rotary dial telephone on a party line. That was like light speed communication. But you came from a place where you understood your connection to this land because a lot of what you ate, you either foraged and picked, or you caught by fishing, or you trapped, or you hunted it. And everybody had a garden. And so you came from this place where there was an honest connection to the landscape. Well, as happens in a lot of societies, people move away and they go to the big city and blah, blah, blah. And for me, it's about, I've never lost that connection to the land. I've never lost the passion for the wild others, as Shane calls them, who depend upon these lands like I do.
Yeah.
And so I just try to tell that story as honestly as I can. Warts, bumps, all the good, all the bad. Try to say, here's what it is, and this is why I am so passionate about it. It forms my identity of where I came from. It formed my identity of who I am today. And it is what I see as a future in America, that an America without the hunting, conservation, landscape, scale, ethic of clean air, clean water, productive land is not the America I want to live in. And so I just say, this is what it means to me, as hard as it is to articulate. If you're honest about, and there's times when I try to articulate it and I start getting kind of choked up because it's the passion. It's just, it's so important to me. And I don't know how else to do it other than to just try and say it as honestly as possible.
But for that to work, you have to have true and honest motives.
No, you're definitely correct in that. To that honesty part, or that are you the real person of who you are, I think that takes time to learn who you really are.
Yeah. We all fall into...
Right. When I was 25, who I thought I was and who I thought I wanted to be was so different than what I've realized who I am today. Today, I'm an old kind of desk jockey accountant who is blessed to live in the greatest country in the world, who has platforms that people, for whatever reason I can't quite understand, want to listen to what story I tell and what I have to say. And I can do it without any regard for who likes it or dislikes it or how much money it does or doesn't make.
What motivates you to do it? Because, it's work, man. Anybody who attempts to film their own hunts and produce them at a level you do, it's like
me the same thing. What's the motivation? And there's a lot of that. I'll go back to, and this is really getting back. So, my grandparents came from Finland and Sweden. So, my grandmother and my grandfather were the first who spoke English. So. And I know some people, their families came over in the 1500s, 1600s, whatever it might be, 1800s. Not mine. My family, and I think this might be a little bit of Scandinavia carrying through my gene pool, but my grandmother, who was, other than my mom and my wife, the most important influence on my life was my grandmother. Her family came from Finland, and she just had this sense about everything you've been given today, and she'd been given so little. She did not have running water until, and indoor plumbing, until she moved into an old folks home in 1993. I would go to her house as a kid, and they had the old water pump, the big jack handle. And I was so amazed that you could pump on that thing, and water would eventually come out of it. And I'd haul pails of water up there for her to cook on her coal stove. And so as little as she had, she thought she had the world by the tail. And so... But what she always said is, and she was a huge volunteer in everything she did. I mean, church, school.
Yeah.
Grandma Ethel was like every place, everywhere, doing what she could. And she didn't have any money, but she had time and passion. And I would go stay with her in the summer. My parents had dropped me off, probably thinking we got rid of that rugrat for a couple of weeks. But for me, that's where this whole... If you're given a lot, you should give back even more kind of thing. And I am the luckiest guy, and people have heard me say this on my podcast, I'm the luckiest guy that ever landed on the planet. I will argue to the ends of time. There's no one more blessed than I am. And I have a wife who, she knows the buttons to push also, Brian, as you've been married long enough. So there will be the days when I'm just run down and I'm tired, and some folks been hating on you, and you're like, why? You ask yourself though the question, why in the hell am I doing this? I could be out fishing today, or I could be out hunting without these cameras. And so when I get to those points, my wife is like, oh, so you're just going to give up after all this? Who else is in a situation where their wife is going to put up with someone being gone for 4 months straight? All right. Who else is in the financial position where if this makes money or loses money, it's not the end of the world? Oh, all these people have subscribed to your platforms and watch you, and you're just going to walk away from them, huh? By the time she's done, I feel like I'm about a half-inch tall. And I go upstairs, kind of pout to myself for a little while and think about it. And then I'm like, yeah, let's go. Yeah. Come on, Randy, get after it. So I know that's it's kind
that's
of
funny.
funny
though. I love that. But I like to hear that.
But my wife, and that's one of the great blessings in my life, is my wife knows where the buttons are, and if there is a great blessing in life, it's to have a partner who shares a lot of vision, a lot of wants to go the same direction as you do. Yeah. And I don't care if it's the spouse, which spouse is behind the scene, the husband or wife. There's usually one out in front and one in back who wants none of the profile and the exposure to it. But that is a blessing beyond anything I can say that allows me to do this and do it the way that I do it.
Let me ask you this. Think about 50 years from now, 100 years from now. How do you think the world will see someone like Shane Mahoney?
I think 50 years from now, 100 years from now, I mean, who knows, but there are certain people that have stepped forward at critical times, and it's about leadership. Leading is you don't lead from the middle of the pack. You don't lead by turning, and I've been speaking, and this is part of my presentation tonight, is that leadership is never easy, it's never comfortable, and it's almost always inconvenient. Easy, hard, not easy, uncomfortable, not comfortable, and inconvenient rather than convenient. And so I look at Shane at this time when we're in this highly charged partisan world. Shane is out there kicking down the fences that people are trying to build that would separate us as, oh, you're a left or a right, you're an R or a D, you're a whatever. I think a guy like Shane, I think, my buddy Jim Posowitz, who I was telling you, who stopped the dam over there in the Paradise Valley of Montana. There's going to be, like every generation, there's going to be a handful of people that once they're gone, you then start realizing the value of their message. Because they had a perspective and a vision that many couldn't see at the time, but over time, their message and their perspective became validated just through the course of events. And so I think people like that are going to be looked at as way forward thinkers. And maybe I'm biased in that because I have pretty close relationships with both those folks and get to talk to them regularly. But there are people who are going to be leaders. There are people listening to your podcast that someday, 10 years from now, are going to be the leaders of the hunting and conservation and public land community. This hotel you're in right here, this is where my advocacy started.
Really?
Yeah. In 1993,
It's when I graduated from high school.
Oh, really? Okay. I'd moved here 2 years prior. And south of town, there was this land exchange going. Well, there wasn't a land exchange going on. A timber company from Oregon, a guy named Mel McDougall and Tim Blixeth, they'd come in and bought all the Plum Creek timberland. Plum Creek used to let us hunt, cross their property to get to public land, whatever. Well, it was old railroad grants that was that checkerboard pattern.
Yeah, okay.
Well, they came in here and said, ha, we'll buy this from Plum Creek. We'll shut it all off, and we're going to build these beautiful mountain retreats everywhere. We're going to get filthy rich. Well, as quick as they started doing that, the hunting community is like, whoa, now what do we do? Well, our Senator Max Baucus held a public hearing here at this hotel. And I went to it, and I'm sitting in the back of the room, and so I'm 29 years old at the time.
You're a baby.
And I'm listening, and there's not a hunter who's speaking. There's not none of the discussion is about from the standpoint of hunters. It's all about developers, or it's about endangered species. It's about whatever. And finally, I can feel this pressure building up in my chest, like, calm down, Randy. Because my wife always says, wherever you go and speak in public, do not swear. Don't swear. But I was fortunate in college. In my electives, I took business and professional speaking. Were the electives. So I'm okay getting up in front of a crowd. And there was a pause in the room, and finally, the one of the people who has talked me into a lot of advocacy, he's retired from our game and fish. He looked at me like, can you believe that we're not getting a word in here as hunters? Finally, I stood up. And I don't even really remember what I said, Brian, but I rambled on for about 10 minutes. And even the senator was standing. I remember him looking at me. And Kurt, this guy who's retired from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, now over a beer, he'll tell the story that Randy threatened to get a senator unelected and blah, 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 blah. I have no idea what I really said, other than afterwards. So many hunters came up to me and said, I wanted to say that, but I didn't know how to say it, or I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't know if other hunters felt the way I did. And that engaged the hunting community in this process. And so it took 4 years, but this huge land exchange kept 100 and some thousand acres of public access there.
Right.
Through the work of a lot of people. But that was kind of my first dive into this, where I've always been kind of some would say, oh, he's always been a leader. Some would say, no, he's always been a loudmouth. I mean, even in high school.
Don't they kind of go hand in hand a little bit? Yeah.
In sports, people were like, oh, Newberg, he's a leader. So I was the captain of the football team for a couple of years. And so stuff like that. I think for some people, you're comfortable saying what's on your mind and let the chips fall where they may. And some people aren't.
Yeah.
But you need both.
And I think it can be learned.
Yeah.
It might be really hard, but you do it for a while, it gets easier.
Yeah. But getting back to the point of there are people listening to this podcast today, I know there are, who are going to be the leaders that are doing.
I hope so, because that's why I'm doing what I do.
If someone would have told me that getting fired up at an event in this hotel in 1993 would have set me down the path where I don't know how many times I've been to D.C., how engaged I am in public land politics, conservation history, all this stuff. If someone would have told me that's what would come of that, I would have never believed them. It's like, no, I'm just this lowly bean counter CPA. I'm going to go back to my office and keep my mouth shut and put my head down and make a lot of money.
Yeah, right.
So,
well, tell me this. You've done your history and you've read, and Theodore Roosevelt at the time, he did convince the American people, for sure, or was an instrumental individual. There were others, but a huge part of how they developed this conservation ethic. Mm-hmm. But they didn't put him on Mount Rushmore till a long time later.
Right.
Yep. And even today, now, there was even a time where he wasn't so popular.
Right. He was a crazy wingnut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now you look at Theodore, and he's probably considered one of the greatest presidents in U.S. history. Mm-hmm. So, and that's whether you're left or right.
Right.
It's just commonly accepted. I just asked the question because I think about Shane Mahoney and the work that he's doing, and developing the Wild Harvest Initiative and launching that, partnering and so forth. It is absolutely, the truth is out there. Just we've never compiled it. We've never had the leader to do what he's doing right now, and then be able to create a living, ongoing database of information with all the views, the data point views that he's providing. Never been done. Here it is, and it will continue on forward. So other journalists and writers and can leverage that information to share a message.
Right.
It's powerful. I think that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, I just don't see how people won't look back on that and say there was a pivotal moment and it's neat because I feel like I'm here in it in a way, participating in a small way. And I feel like, 50 years from now, right now it just feels like in general there is an awakening within the hunting community and the world at large around hunting and around conservation,
right,
as it relates to hunting. Like to me, the hunting and conservation are just married.
Right.
They're one and the same.
Yeah.
And so to see it being seen in the right light, it's very hard. I just think it's exciting. It's cool. It's a great time to be involved. And I'm anxious to see where it goes in 50 years.
Yeah.
But
I won't be here, Brian. I'm 52. You might. I won't.
I've heard Shane talk about how in the 20th century, this is the century where people will realize how incredible, what a treasure the North American model of conservation really is. More ducks than you can shake a stick at, geese everywhere, deer, elk. And this is amidst a giant human population coexisting in a modern world. The idea that you can have both, for many people, they're mutually exclusive. They don't see that it works together. And yet, with hunting and the way that the U.S. has, and public land and the way that we've done it, it is. They're both viable at the same time.
Yeah. And Shane always does this morning I was saying he does this and he says it every time, and he probably said it on your podcast the other day, is that if in 100 years ago in 1917, if the United States would have had the Endangered Species Act, we would have listed every species on our continent.
It's crazy.
Because we didn't have an Endangered Species Act. We took a different model. The hunting community said, we're going to tax ourselves, we're going to reinvest in the landscape and the habitat and conservation. And if you look at the number of animals we said we're going to take custody / care of, and where they went under our model from that point to where they are today. I mean, we have goose shit on every golf course in America.
Yeah.
Whitetail deer are a nuisance.
Yes.
In
They're on every bumper.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, you look at that compared to the model of the Endangered Species Act.
Mm-hmm.
So often you get critics who will say, oh, well, you guys don't protect anything, blah, blah, blah.
You just kill it.
Well, if hunters knew that story and put it in the context and looked at it through the lens that Shane throws out there,
Mm-hmm.
our model of how we've done it has worked through way more challenging times than today. We're talking about the Great Depression. We're talking about the dirty 30s of the Dust Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
It worked through the
all of it.
World War II. It's a time-proven model, and it has worked because it connected people to the land.
Mm-hmm.
The Endangered Species Act does not connect people to the land. And I'm not saying that to bash the Endangered Species Act. I'm saying that when we talk about models for conservation and what's best for species, the models we've used, that we've adapted, that we've built,
are proven.
They have to take a backseat to nobody.
Mm-hmm.
And I stand up and I will tell people or ask people, show me the success of the Endangered Species Act. Well, the bald eagle got delisted. Okay, yeah, we got rid of DDT, and guess what?
Yeah.
Bald eagles got delisted.
Mm-hmm.
Just the other day, the Greater Yellowstone population segment of grizzly bears got delisted. The ironic part of that is
it should have been
two
done.
states, or the state that had the hunting season on grizzly bears, the year I moved here, 1991, you could buy an over-the-counter grizzly bear tag. They never disappeared from the Montana wild country
Mm-hmm.
because hunters were not going to stand for that. Well, then they got covered under the Endangered Species Act and all these protections. So, yeah, there's a few examples they can point to that the ESA has worked. I can, you give me a game species, and I will tell you, here's how many it had in 1917. Here's how many millions it has today.
Well, so often I think the messaging is confusing because those that are non-hunters,
Mm-hmm.
they often assume that the reason the endangered species, that the animals are endangered, is for hunting, over hunting. It's like well, hunters killed them all,
Right.
and it's so often has nothing to do with it. You know, it's completely some other reason.
Where all this takes me, Brian, and you and I talk about this a lot
Mm-hmm.
when we're not on podcasts, is hunters need to learn our own story. To me,
Amen.
if we're going to, back to your point of where does this lead and who's going to be the leaders, the people listening to your podcast will be leaders if they go and learn our story first. I was so thankful that I had teachers, I had junior high teachers who saw my passion for this. And in fact, my high school English teacher, Rhonda Murray, I should have been thrown down to the principal's office. I was like this. I hated creative writing.
Yeah.
Because you had to, it was Tennyson and Alcott and all these classic American authors you were supposed to read and write like them. I was shooting spitballs and, jabbing the kid on the desk next to me and all this stuff. Well, thankfully, she saw my passion for outdoors, and she said, I'm going to let you go do your own thing. You have to write hunting stories the whole semester.
Twist my arm.
What's that?
Twist my arm.
Yeah. And so in doing that, I got to learn a lot about our history. I would go to the library and I'd read this stuff and I'd learn about it. And I didn't know it all and by any stretch. I still don't know it all by any stretch. But
how powerful it is to know, though.
Right. That's it. If we're going to tell our story, we have to know our story. So if there's someone listening, driving down the road right now, listening to your podcast, the best thing they could do is learn their own story, their own personal story, the story of the community they belong to, i.e., in this case, the hunting community. Mm-hmm. And they will see so many similarities, so many things today that are similar to what our history has passed.
And I think the history of the United States, which is a community we're all part of as well. Learn about the American Revolution, learn about the Civil War, learn about frontier life, learn about those that expanded through the West. Learn about the different Indian groups that are out there. Learn about some of those famous people like Daniel Boone and Kit Carson and, Jim Bridger. Like, go through that stuff. I think it's fascinating, which brings me to this next. Randy, folks, has just joined the Gritty Book Club. And
Gritty Book Club.
The Gritty
I've
Book
never
Club.
written a book in my life. So.
And so what's going to happen is Randy has some great books that he's read on conservation. I want to become more educated in this space and more knowledgeable, and I figure I'll just bring the Gritty Bowmen listeners along with me. So I'm going to get a few books from you and read them, and then Randy and I are going to get back on the show and talk about them. And I think it's good because in some ways it's just going to be a little history show, because all we're going to do is recount sort of what the book covered, and it's going to be history. Other times more philosophical, maybe, where we're talking about ideologies and motives and things like that. So I think it's going to be a great, I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I hope that you aren't disappointed, Brian, because, for me, when I got a book, it's got to have a lot of pictures in it. I read slowly. But,
I'm easy to please when it comes to reading books. I find it's rare that I read a book and I'm not glad I read it, you know?
Oh, exactly. And I look at the amount of time that gets wasted on Facebook, arguing and ranting.
TV and so on,
and
yeah.
I think, gosh, if people would just take 1/4 of that time and go read a good book about themselves, of who their community is, their culture. Go read some other books that are not part of you.
I have friends, so I think, okay, if I do a 1 hour, 2 hour podcast on a book that changed my life, or that was pivotal for me, and I read that book, and then I share it with someone else on the podcast, and that person goes out and goes, I was inspired to now go and read this book. And then they go and read the book for 2 hours, or it's a 20-hour book. They get an hour and a half from me, but then they get 20 hours from the guy who wrote the book. Yep. Now I get emails that are like, thank you so much for tuning me into this book. It changed my life. I'm on a new path. And I'm sorry, I don't listen to your podcast very much anymore because now I read books all the time. I'm an audiobook junkie. It's like, but I think that's neat.
To that point, and I suspect most of your readers have read the Sand County Almanac.
Yep. I read that, and
I don't know how many times I've read it.
That, I'll admit, is a tough book to get through.
It is.
It is not an easy read.
You're going to get more out of it.
Yeah.
You're going to get a lot more out of it every time you read it. Your life experiences are going to put yourself into, now I know what he was doing. So you guys did that bear hunt in Southeast Alaska, right? So I was following along with that. And you guys were on a place not too far from where I bear hunt up there. Mm-hmm. So there's this spot where I go, and we've shot this piece. I just got to figure out how to use it. I found this stump that had been cut down. Mm-hmm. And it's a Sitka spruce. And you could see where the guys spaded their planks in there to do this crosscut saw thing. You could tell it happened a long time ago.
Yeah.
So my camera guy, he's like, I wonder how old that is. And I'm like, I don't know. But in the Sand County Almanac, Leupold writes, as he's sawing this log, he's, okay, this is the Civil War, and this is when the last buffalo got shipped down the river from Fort Benton, Montana. I'm on this stump. I'm at 600 rings on this tree. I'm like, no way a Sitka spruce cannot live 600 years. Come to find out, they'll live 700 to 800 years. So 2012, I'm standing on this stump, and I'm doing the math, 600 years of what this tree has seen. He saw the Russians come to Alaska for the sea otter trade. He saw the Russians sell Alaska. He saw the Tlingit Haida tribes fight terrible, just crazy battles. He had seen changes in climate and weather beyond anything ever. He'd seen earthquakes and tsunamis. And so it was only then when I started counting the rings on this stump that I really understood that chapter in the Sand County Almanac where Leupold is cutting that log. And it's just now every time when I'm bear hunting, when I float or kind of motor by that little point where that stump is, I got to tell everyone this story. It's like, yeah, right up there.
That is.
But it was one of those events in my time in the outdoors where it just struck me. You know what, Randy? You are standing in this landscape where your life is just a blink in the eye. It's a blink of the eye. It makes you feel so insignificant, and Leupold does a good job of making you understand. We humans, we have a tendency to think we're all important, whether it's in our little house, whether it's in our community, whatever it is. You go to these large, intact landscapes, and you realize you are just a gnat's ass on the path of progress.
Right. No, it's that's one of the things I love about being in the outdoors and in the wilderness is how it can really check your ego. Yeah. The mountain doesn't care at all about you. You could die tomorrow and nothing will change out there. Yeah. And when you see that, when you're like, man, I could die right here in this rock, in this mountain, and these trees do not care. Nothing does. It would just go on like nothing happened. Yeah. It's a very humbling experience. I've heard Joe Rogan talk about that and being in LA where you feel like you're a big deal. And then going out there and you feel like nothing cares. You're like, gosh, I'm really not a big deal. I'm just a little tiny dude on a planet that's going to be gone pretty soon. Right. You know, I think it's very important to think about that. I just want people to, I want hunters and people at large to just love the world that we're in, the planet that we're on, and the animals that are here, and to embrace the natural world more than we have. Yep. We're just so disconnected from it. So if I can create a film or a story or an adventure where people connect to the natural world, it's like, it's such an amazing thing. You know, I often talk to people about money, and I'm like, money doesn't make you happy. And if you're not happy with the amount of money you have now, you're not going to be happy if you had 10 times the amount you have now. No. It's not about that. It's not about wealth. It's not about material things. Yeah. It's really about the struggle. Go outside, sleep in a floorless shelter up on the top of a mountain for 3 weeks, and all of a sudden you're like, you find happiness in discomfort. It's weird. It's like this completely like ironic situation where you think all this comfort and wealth and material stuff is going to make you happy. Yeah. But it's a connection to the natural world that really brings so much. That's why I think that you've heard you talk about this before. Really, the big reason, like Shane Mahoney's like, I could give a rat's ass about hunters in terms of what I care about is the animals, right? Not whether we can shoot them and eat them. Right. I care about them thriving, growing, all the animals across the planet being awesome in the best health possible and thriving. I care about that. But what he's found, and you've said this too, is that for some reason human beings have a difficult time caring like he cares if they haven't hunted. Right. And it's not universal, but there's a strong like correlation between the data that shows that hunters care disproportionately more than someone who doesn't go out and spend time in the natural world. Absolutely. And I think it's just goes back to that connection, that happiness, that fulfillment that comes from being out there that makes you feel like you you care about it. Yeah. You realize this is what really is important, not this concrete world we've constructed. No. Not at all. And so without hunter recruitment and without involvement and without all of that, the motivation and the heart and the drive can disappear. You talk about the Endangered Species Act. That's kind of how I picture it. Whereas hunting, you're actively engaged, so you get all those actively engaged people caring. With the Endangered Species Act, it's like, let's just not touch it. Right. And then people don't care anymore. Right. It's just out there taking care of itself. Yeah. We don't need to worry about it.
I was asked to go to Washington and Lee University and give a presentation about large carnivores from a hunter standpoint. And so the whole environmental sciences faculty and all the classes were allowed to attend my lecture, and I wasn't sure how. I'm just going to lay it out there. This is how Randy Newberg sees the world. And I told them in advance. I sent him an outline. And it was very interesting to watch some of the body language when I said, for me, the wild natural world is a place to participate, not a place to spectate. You will never see, if you choose that you are only going to spectate, you will never see the world the way I do, because I choose to participate. And I participate, to fully participate, it's not just I'm going to go for a hike. That's spectating.
Yeah.
To fully participate, you're going to go somewhere where the natural elements could kill you, that you have to think on your own, where you are not in control, and you somehow leave your mark on that landscape by taking an animal, catching and killing a fish, sawing down a tree for your firewood, or whatever it is.
You have to eat every day. It's like the circle of life.
Right.
That's participation.
So it's impractical to think that a person who watches football understands what it's like to be under center or be on the offensive or defensive line and playing football.
Right.
Whatever activity it is in life.
Spectating is not the same.
Understand how it is to participate in it. And for me, I will never find myself as a spectator to the natural world. The day I can no longer participate in the natural world is the day I've told my wife, I'm going on the last big hike. You'll know somewhere near where I'm at, because the truck will be parked at that trailhead. But I want the grizzly bears to eat me. I want the buzzards to, pick my carcass. I want the worms to eat my brains, whatever. I want the full final circle of I have participated in the natural world. And so back to this lecture I was given, and it had to do with large carnivores and how those of us who live here as participants in this landscape see these large carnivores. We care about them. There will never be a time in my life that the grizzly bears and wolves are gone from this landscape. Nope. Never. I will be fighting to the ends of time to make sure they have a place here. And you could see some of them looking at me like, what the hell? I thought you were a hunter. Yeah, I participate. So this affects me in a deeper sense, in a manner that you will never understand until you go and participate. And I get that. I understand you're not going to see it through my life. So I've just accepted that in everything in life there are spectators and there are participants. And the things I'm most passionate about, I'm going to be a participant. I'm not good at being a spectator. I'm not.
Well, and that's kind of my encouragement to all hunters and conservationists that listening to this podcast and that are out there. I'm all about participation, which means not just participating in the natural world, but then coming home and participating in the message that we have to share with the wider world. Yeah. Because without us sharing the message, giving our food to our neighbors, showing photos and pictures and sharing adventures and film of what we're doing, then we're not closing that circle. We're not doing as much good as we could to protect those wild places and wild animals that we love. Yeah. So participation is what it's all about.
Yeah. So,
well,
are we getting ready to wrap up?
We got to wrap up.
We got to wrap up. I'm sorry. Before we wrap up, if we are going to do this book club, what do you call it? Gritty Book Club?
Gritty Book Club.
All right. If there's one book I could leave people to read before you and I get the chance to do
Lay it on me.
It is a book, I've read it so many times because it is the story. Nothing paints better the conservation history of the United States than the bison. of what abundance had to the tragedy of just the liquidation of the herds, to how George Bird Grinnell made it his task in life to protect the bison from extinction. The only reason there are genetic purebred bison on the North American continent today is because of George Bird Grinnell, who at the time was the editor of what we now know today as Field and Stream magazine. He dedicated his entire career to that. And there's a whole Yellowstone story to it, everything else. But Michael Punke is the author.
Awesome.
It's called The Last Stand.
The Last Stand.
In the subtitle, George Bird Grinnell in the Battle to Save the Bison. And what's the remainder of it? Anyhow, it's the main title is...
That's book number 1.
That's book number 1, if people read that. And reread it, because if you're interested in where we came from as a community, as a group, from the hunting standpoint, and if we want to hold valid claim to the mantle, to the name, to the title as America's conservationists, read what Grinnell did, and that is what it took to claim that as our become the possessors of that. And it's going to take a huge amount of work to retain that. But he gives just such a remarkable account of, Punke does, of what Grinnell did to get this done. And we owe the bison for you think about how bison get treated in today's world and how confined they are. It's somewhat disappointing to see that, because I agree. We owe the bison the debt of awakening the American conscience about conservation. Yeah. So
fascinating.
That's one. If between now and when we get on the book club podcast, I would suggest anyone who wants to read a really good book that will shape their mind of how conservation history happened in this country. The Last Stand.
Excellent. Randy, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Brian,
thanks
for having me.
Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Keep it up.
And thanks to your listeners.
Yeah.
Great group of people.
Yeah. Check out Randy, Hunt Talk Radio, TV show. You're on YouTube, which I watch a lot of.
Yeah. Randy Newberg Hunter is our YouTube channel. Yeah. HuntTalk.com is our forum. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, man. Stay gritty.
I will
be gritty.
As gritty as it gets.
The future of public lands. All of us own them, all of us use them. Political activists are demanding us to hand over the public lands where the state legislators could transfer and control these lands. U.S. citizens own 640 million acres of public lands, which creates 6.1 million jobs and generates $646 billion per year.
States have been selling off land to pay bills for over 100 years, thus closing access to the public. 39% of original 64 million acres have been sold. The cost of land management would break most state budgets. For instance, who will pay the hundreds of millions of dollars to fight major wildfires each year? It doesn't matter how many promises are made. The financial reality is it will force states to have to sell off our public land.
President Theodore Roosevelt said, "We must preserve our lands for future generations, not merely to the people now alive, but to the unborn people. Our duty to the whole bids us restrain an unprincipled present-day minority from wasting the heritage of these unborn generations."